It's real. The end of life is real. Thank you to our final patrons, Redwolf4765, Midnight Gemlord, and Sean. Thank you to our $3 members, Recliner Plays and Redwolf4765, and a very big thank you to our $25 patron, Alex Ice Rose. Before we hop into this discussion on how the end of life is truly real with the end of Jade, please remember to leave your own thoughts on how NAKABA is going to handle the end of life within the comment section down below. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also hit that little notification so you miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also do a Patreon below, esports though as one, kind of one dama, exclusive videos, early content, and more. You also now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Now, let's hop into the discussion. What's up guys, Pencil, and here we are to talk about how NAKABA is actually doing it. He put a character that is on the protagonist's side in the dirt and kept him there before the 100 chapter mark. Now, if you have not read Seven Deadly Sins, this may mean absolutely nothing to you. Like, you may be like, okay, yeah. To quote that one guy from Fate, people die when they are killed. So obviously, it wouldn't mean much to you if you haven't read Seven Deadly Sins. But presumably, knowing a majority of the people who watch my videos, I know a lot of us have read Seven Deadly Sins. And while there are many critiques with the series, I'd say one of the biggest critiques is that nobody of substance on our side in Seven Deadly Sins really goes. At least not permanently. Usually every single character that is on our side for any decent time period will always come back. Even if they are literally like torn to shreds, atomized, vaporized, whatever you want to call it, literally burnt to acid or whatever, they will come back. You have it with Dreyfus, you have it with Hendrickson, you have it with meliodas, you have it with Bond, Alain, so many different characters, all different varieties. Whenever they're executed, they usually come back. Are there exceptions to this rule? Yes. Zartros came back and then officially got put 6 feet under. That's great. Are there major exceptions to this rule? The only other real major exception of like a major character being put in the ground and them staying in the ground is Escanor. And you know how long that took NAKABA? The 300s. You know how long the 300 was? 7 years. Like, legitimately, it takes NAKABA a while, or it took NAKABA a while to put someone down and keep them down permanently of any real importance. But here's the thing. We are on chapter 100. 4 Nights, if it's to be of comparable length to Seven Deadly Sins, isn't even a third of the way done. And yet already, NAKABA has taken one of our main group characters and put them 6 feet under. And he didn't just put him 6 feet under, he explicitly went out of our way to bring our cheat character over and have our cheat character's super dumb, stupid, crazy magic straight up lay it out for us. Yeah, we can fix his body, but this man is dead. He is done. There is nothing we can do about it, and we cannot bring him back to life. And with that being the case, this kind of like opens the proverbial floodgates, if you will. Like, I think bodies are going to drop. Bodies are going to drop an extreme number. Because once again, it's not just the fact that a major character, which I'd say Jade was, not the major character. He's obviously not a titular character. You can argue he's not even a secondary titular character. But he was traveling with our main group. He was going to be part of the Tristan platoon, which was going to go off on their own and be their own little pseudo group that we would have to follow. He was going to be that, and now he is gone. Right at the 100 chapter mark. We are capable of executing characters now. And as I mentioned before, I do believe certain characters, even with Jade's execution, will be exempt to this rule. And we'll go in ascending order of importance and why I believe so. 1, Percival. He's been literally executed twice within the first 100 chapters. This is just something that has happened, will continue to happen. I highly doubt that's suddenly going to change at any point. Percival is our main character. He is the Knight of Death. We've literally seen him either A, get stabbed directly through the heart or have his neck put at a 90-degree angle and he's gotten back up just fine. So I think he's exempt ultimately. I don't think there's going to be much debate about that. Like, maybe he has a death at the end of this series, like the ultimate sacrifice to revive or save his friends or something like that. But when I'm talking in this video, I'm talking about like deaths that happen progressively throughout the narrative. And I don't think like halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, or realistically even 7/8 through the narrative, we're going to randomly execute Percival and make someone else the real main character. Percival, he is on the chopping block in the sense that he will keep getting chopped up, but I do not believe he shall go anywhere anytime soon. For our next candidate, who I think is pretty much immune for more reasons than one, Lancelot. Lancelot is him, for one, and you just can't execute him. I'm sorry, it's in the contract, it's the rules of nature. It be like that when it be like that sometimes. You can't execute him. But he's 2-1, but even with him being him, he's also like him power-wise. Like, legitimately, unless Arthur himself randomly shows up and says, "Ayo, Lance, I want the ones right now again," when Lance is on his solo journey to Benwick, yeah, there's not a single individual in the verse right now. Well, there are single individuals in the verse right now, Arthur included, arguably Meliodas, and who knows how strong the other sins are. But there are individuals in the verse that could hypothetically come pack Lance up, but the likelihood of him getting packed up is also very, very low. I don't think halfway through the narrative, I don't think 1/3 of the way through the narrative like I think we are now. Heck, I don't even think, once again, 7/8 through the narrative, we're going to see Lance get packed up. He is our secondary main character, literally the second character, well, no, the 4th character we get introduced to overall, but the second titular knight we get introduced to overall, and overall was the guide for Percy and his group for the longest time, and now is getting his own solo arc. I highly doubt NAKABA is going to just randomly off him. We need the Knight of War because we're waging a war against Camelot. I think Lance is going to be perfectly exempt and perfectly fine for majority of the series. Could I also see him dying a warrior or noble death by the end of the series? Of course. But once again, we're talking about progression throughout the series. Speaking of progression, I also think Tristan is pretty much immune to the, haunting death thing. Multiple reasons for that. One, I'm not exactly sure NAKABA was brave enough to do it. Like, legitimately, Tristan kind of is a pulling point and a very big selling point for a lot of Seven Deadly Sins fans. And even though NAKABA is adamant about the fact that you do not need to read Seven Deadly Sins in order to enjoy Four Knights of the Apocalypse, I bet he knows, like anyone else knows, that a lot of his viewership comes from people who want to see Meliodas, who want to see Elizabeth, and definitely want to see their kid in action, especially considering Tristan was originally supposed to be the main character, not just a supporting main character. It seems highly unlikely that NAKABA is going to execute him anyway throughout the narrative. 1, because obviously the money, 2, the money, and 3, the money, but also for the fact that he has so much growing to do. Like, we've seen he has multiple stages of his Nephilim form, but obviously he's probably gonna have something akin to a true magic. He knows very little about himself overall, and we kind of already got rid of his copy in Jade, so removing him would also kind of be like, not even, what's the opposite of redundant? It would be redundant to remove his character at this point. So I think Tristan is also pretty much safe. One of the titular Four Knights of the Apocalypse, the son of the 2 big money makers from the original series, has no real reason to be executed, and the narrative probably wouldn't benefit too much from it, at least early on. Once again, I'm kind of saying this with all the knights, but I do think it's true. I could see him dying a noble warrior's death at the very end too, or hypothetically being sealed away, or being the replacement for Chaos, or something like that. But at least in terms of narrative progression, I do not see him going anywhere either. Then finally, we do have Gawain. She's the most recently introduced of the knights. She has also had the least amount of screen time naturally because of that. And due to that, hypothetically, I could see NAKABA executing her, but I could see her being executed in the same way that Escanor was in the original series. But even then, I feel like that's highly unlikely. I don't think NAKABA would do the exact same thing twice, even with his insistence that Four Knights is his own independent property, just with ties and references to Seven Deadly Sins. I don't think he would execute the Sunshine User twice. So I think even more, almost on the level of Percy himself, I don't think we're going to see Gawain go. It just seems a little bit too unlikely for me at this point. I believe she'll be sticking around just fine. Another titular main character, another character NAKABA has a whole ton of work to be doing with in terms of developing her, understanding her, letting us get a better understanding of her. Her background's too interesting. She has ties to Camelot, ties to Arthur, ties to too many important characters like Merlin and even Escanor through her grace that I highly doubt she's going to go anywhere before the narrative is over. Could she end up going away in a hero's death? Yes. I don't believe it though, mainly because NAKABA, I don't know, he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would do that twice with the exact same kind of character. I know Escanor and Gawain are very different fundamentally. I'll be making a video talking about that soon enough, but even still, making the human sunshine wielder sacrifice themselves at the very end by going into the one ultimate seems a little bit redundant. So I highly doubt that's going to happen. So in short, I believe all the four knights will make it throughout a majority of the narrative. At most, I could see them perishing within like the last 30 chapters when NAKABA's wrapping the series up, or getting rid of them in the final battle or something like that. I don't see any of them going too soon. The next two that I believe are just purely safe, just due to their nature and format within the narrative, is number one going to be Anne. Anne is a character who has sort of been fluctuating in importance back and forth, being introduced relatively early on in the narrative around chapter 16. She has been important, but the main reason I think she's exempt from the many death flags that are going to start flying up, presumably if Jade's death has the ramifications that I think it's going to have on a narrative level, which I'll get to soon, I think she'll be fine. Mainly because, one, she is, in fact, Percival's main love interest as far as I can tell. And that pretty much grants her immunity. Like, as cruel and evil and mean as NAKABA can be sometimes, I don't think he's going to just execute the main character's main love interest. It seems a little bit too out of character for him. We are not reading JJK. We are not reading Chainsaw Man. I don't think NAKABA is that cruel. So she gets that first layer of protection, which I think is the bulkiest. Being the love interest of any major character, especially the main character in a narrative, is usually enough plot armor to make sure that you make it all the way to the end. Number two, she also has connections to Camelot in a very similar vein to Gawain, and she also has a whole ton of mystery behind her in terms of what those connections are and what they mean and what happened to her mother, and I don't think that story is going to be fleshed out for a while. Like, remember, introduced in chapter 16, the whole plot line about her mother may have been introduced in like chapter 24. We're 75 chapters later and still haven't gotten any elaboration on that. So I can definitely see NAKABA holding that over our heads for a while. So that's another reason why she has to stick around. 3, we have the new recent magic awakening for her, or maybe not magic awakening, but true magic or something like that. Not the form, but you know what I mean, where she did something weirdly magically inclined to Macduff, which made him drop like a rock and drop it like it's hot. So obviously we have to explore that more, which means she's going to be around for a while. So I think Anne is just perfectly safe. I don't necessarily see anything happening to her. Could she take damage? Yes. Could she suffer extremely character-wise? Yes. But specifically death gracing her door is something that's highly unlikely to me, especially considering she does have a scapegoat that also happens to love Percy. So I think, if anything, a moment like that where Percy gets a power boost from the death of someone who loves him, it wouldn't be from Anne. It would be from somebody else. And we'll talk about who that somebody else is going to be soon, but let's talk about the other character who I think is wrapped up in just the right amount of plot armor so that they will not perish, to the point where the character who did perish got in the way for them in order to keep them around. It's Isolde. Once again, her major support, it's the same thing. She's the main love interest for Tristan, and even though Tristan is the third knight we're introduced to, even though Tristan's designation as a knight isn't the most pressing, like death or war or anything like that, I do believe the future wife or the future lover of Pestilence is going to be just fine. We literally just had a character sacrifice their lives for her already, and I don't see Tristan ever like letting her get in danger, especially after what happened to Jade. I see him guarding her even more fiercely than he already did, and if anything, she may just take extreme damage so we get more like Demon Tristan situations, but outside of that, I don't see her going anywhere. Even by the end of the narrative, I do think at least those two characters, the two major love interests, will get out scot-free. They will be perfectly fine, and that leaves us with 3 characters who I do believe are on the chopping block, but we'll go in order of who I think is on the chopping block and who is most likely to go. And number 1, in terms of who's the safest on this list, is the Chion. I was going to say the Donners, but unfortunately I do believe the Donners can go, and we'll talk about that why when I get to the Donners. But Chion is a character who is fully capable of going, but I just don't entirely see it, because I feel like NAKABA would do us like that. Like, legitimately, if you've been in the fandom and breathing at all, you can tell Chion has an unbelievably healthy hate squad. Do I believe that NAKABA's flipping back and forth with how I feel about him? Like, sometimes I think he's a great character, sometimes I think he's an overwhelming meat muncher, sometimes I think he's somewhere in between. Yeah, but NAKABA's very good at that. He's good at providing multiple perspectives to a character. As of right now, I respect Chion because of what he did in honor of Jade and, you know, getting rid of McDuff. But still, yeah, I don't blame y'all. Bro is an undeniable meat muncher, and NAKABA seems like the kind of guy who would go out of his way to make the character that nobody likes live. It just seems like that's something he would do. Out of the, I'd say out of the kindness of his heart, but no, out of the cruelness of his heart, NAKABA seems like the kind of guy who would let Chion live just to spite us. And I literally have no other reason than that for believing he'll live. Because notably, he is expendable enough. Sure, he's the child of Gilthunder and Margaret. But one, not only do those characters hold like no real positions of power, or extreme power at least, within the kingdom of Leonis, but hypothetically, I mean they could, but normally Tristan would just become king after them, not necessarily Gilthunder and Margaret or anything like that, especially considering Elizabeth is the younger sister of Margaret, and Margaret and Gilthunder aren't suddenly king and queen. It is Elizabeth and Meliodas, so Tristan would just be the next line of succession, and Tristan has Isolde, so there's your king queen right there. So his only ties are to Margaret and Gilthunder, and Gilthunder is a character who was relatively important in Seven Deadly Sins, but I'd say like almost on a quaternary level. Like, bro was barely important enough, much more important in season 1, but fades in prominence after the early 100s. And then after that, you have Margaret, who her most important plot point was being a victim twice. One to Luteschel, one to Hendrickson. So obviously she's not the most important of characters. So it's not like Chion isn't exactly expendable, but for the fact that he has just that little bit of extra nudge with important enough characters and has those royal ties, I think he's the safest out of our group that's remaining that could go. The next safest is going to be the Donners for a very similar reason. He has direct ties to Hauser and a mystery mother. Like, those two things in combination are really, really strange. Like, a mystery mother, a mystery father, bro is just a strange being in terms of the Donners. But having direct ties to known characters within the narrative like Hauser is really, really good for a survival front. Because, you know, we already have Hauser on his character development arc. We may see him again. And I don't think we're going to really be dragging back Donny's, like, you know, corpse, for lack of a better term. Because that is the proper term. But even with that being the case, I still see him going. Like, that's his only hypothetical tie. He's a character we've been with for a while. It would hurt if he were to go. And his power set is likely either going to be made redundant, if not already is redundant. And that's a big pattern we saw with Jade. Jade was one of the most redundant characters we had seen in terms of just like power set to power set. He literally was just a Tristan that we have at home. And he's gone. So considering multiple other characters could either bootleg or actually just perform telekinesis, yeah, Donny can definitely go. And I could definitely see NAKABA doing it specifically to make us sad. I think Jade's death hits more for the solidarity of it. We don't necessarily know too much about Jade as a person. He was very built up in the more recent chapters before his execution. But we know a character like Donny. We've seen a character like Donny grow. We know the kind of pain it would put us in if NAKABA were to axe Donny right in front of Percy. That would be painful. That would hurt. And I could see NAKABA doing it. And we have our final one, the one who I believe is most likely to go, if not next, soon enough. It's Nasiens. I mentioned earlier when I'm talking about Anne that I do believe that there's another character who loves Percy that could give Percy that same like rage, oh no, you slain the person who cared about me kind of amp that isn't Anne, and that would be Nasiens. If you don't think that Nasiens has some sort of romantic interest in Percy at this point, I just kind of gotta ask you, are we reading the same narrative? Like, we literally have the whole scenario, really, where we see Nasiens points out that Jade likes Isolde, and then Jade tries to Uno reverse card him by saying, oh, I know who you like, and we see that Nasiens is like, oh no, they know I like Percival, Nani. And then when he gets said that it's Anne, he plays it off light work because he loves Percy. We've seen how he reacted to Percy and Anne bonding in their day off. We've seen Nasiens is down bad for Percy. He loves the boy. And with that being the case, we know he loves the boy, and we've seen Nasiens grow and developing of himself, and him perishing to give Percy a power-up would be perfect because it would have a lasting impact on Percy forever, unlike something like Jade's death, and it would also have a lasting impact on the audience. Nasiens is still pretty much my best boy, like flat out. I still love the dude to pieces, and thusly him going would definitely at least hurt me, if not hurt a lot of other people. And I think that's NAKABA's main goal, because the thing about Jade's death is that it opens the door. The door was closed, but now the door is open. As mentioned previously, NAKABA executing a major character this early on in the narrative is unprecedented, and considering how big the cast is, it seems entirely likely that NAKABA is more than willing to start cutting people down left and right. And considering that there is a common consensus, at least in the fandom that I can interact with, that people are getting sick and tired of all these side characters and really want to see the four knights be the four knights, I could definitely see NAKABA taking a darker tone and literally start executing these kids left and right, considering there are so many expendables. Cutting us down to just the love interests plus the four knights would put us at 6 characters, which for a majority of the Seven Deadly Sins narrative is what we were working with. Merlin was never technically a full character in of herself. We didn't get her full character really until the very end. So NAKABA working with 10 characters, a little bit unlikely. NAKABA working with 6, very likely. But if we try to throw Chion in there, 7 and 7 all over again, I could definitely see it working. The only hypothetical thing is that it would likely be character deaths that we would actually fully 100% care for based on the time spent with the character. The thing about Jade's death that makes it a little bit weak to me is that I like Jade. He's really, really cool. But I didn't necessarily have enough time to get attached to Jade, the real character that I knew him as. And thusly, the impact of the death didn't hit much outside of a narrative and character utility purpose. I'm not interested in Jade's death as what it meant to me as an individual. I'm more interested in Jade's death as what it means on a narrative front for other characters like Tristan, like Chion, like Isolde. I couldn't necessarily care less about the character itself, even still to this day, despite how much I admit NAKABA did a great job of juicing him up into a real character in a matter of chapters, in a matter of weeks, realistically. That is very impressive, but the impact is lessened for the fact that I did not know Jade all too well. But now we're left with characters that we are beginning to understand very, very well, and characters who could go to extreme effects. And one of the beautiful things about this is still the fact that even if we don't get any more utility deaths, the utility deaths from here on out are going to be much, much, much more impactful for what they could mean for the characters. Once again, due to Jade's nature as a rather passive individual, as a character, as he even mentions within Chion's flashback, the ramifications of his death don't necessarily have many rippling narrative effects on our titular characters except for Tristan. And we'll see his reaction soon enough, but Tristan still is not the main character. Thusly, the impacts that Jade's death will have on him are much more on a superficial level, and we see how NAKABA doesn't even necessarily relate Jade's death to any of Percival's own feelings about Jade. He relates it back to the death of Varghese, meaning that overall the impact relative to our main character, the character who we're going to get the most screen time with naturally, is minimal. But everyone else on the chopping block does have multiple major impacts to hypothetical multiple characters. The hypothetical death of Nasiens would not just impact Percy, but it would impact Percy, it would impact Lance, it would impact Donny, it would impact Anne, it would impact 4 characters in comparison to the 3 that we have being impacted so far. Then, if hypothetically Donners were to die and not Nasiens, then it would have an impact on Nasiens, have an impact on Percival, an impact on Lance, have an impact on Anne. You would get another 4 characters being impacted by that death. Chion's once again the only outlier here. Like, presumably, I would assume that Percy would not care that much. Same thing with Donny and or Nasiens, considering their past relationship with Chion, it would mainly just be Tristan, considering Lance doesn't seem to have any relationship with Chion either, and Gawain wouldn't necessarily have any reaction at all. She probably couldn't care less about Chion, and is wondering why he's even there. So it's entirely possible that Chion's death is being staved off even more because it won't have many refracting narrative impacts, but still, it's entirely possible. And that's the thing. With these character impacts, you can do a whole lot more. Remember, death in fiction is much more of a narrative tool than it is like death in our real life, I'd say so. In terms of the impact it can have on us and on a narrative scale, the most important thing about how you use death in a narrative is how it affects the characters who are still around. Like how death in our world has much more major impacts on the people who are still living rather than the person who has perished. So overall, I'm very excited to see where NAKABA takes this. If he's going to really start dropping characters left and right like I think he is, and or if he's going to stave off, let this be an exception and not the rule, and we see a much more complicated relationship with death within the world of Four Knights of the Apocalypse. However, that's what I think. Please know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. It makes a little notification so you miss out on any videos that come on the channel. Also, I do a page down below. It's always low as $1 This is videos, early content, and more. You also now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Now, thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is Dago the Pencil, writing off.